Hi, my name is Willow Bowall. Today for Speech 2, I am choosing to do Chapter 11, and I'm going to be saying the things that I found most helpful in that chapter, and I'm going to be teaching it to the class. Chapter 11 is how to deliver your speech in the most confident way, in the most successful way, and we're going to be talking about all the tips that I used and things that you should be doing to do your speech to the most full ability that you can. And then on my first slide, we basically just have the introduction. Delivery is the most important part of public speaking, and nonverbal communication is also a huge factor in speech delivery. Some things that go into nonverbal communication can include eye contact, posture, and facial expressions. And we'll talk about all of that later down the line when I introduce it to you guys. And then I also put on here nonverbal expectancy theory. And this theory basically says that people have certain expectations about how you should communicate, and if listeners don't feel like you have met their expectations, then they won't care or be as interested in the message that you have to share with them. And a quote from the book that I felt like explains this to the best is, "If your delivery is poor, then you will lose credibility." And then moving on to my next slide, one of the most important things that I thought that I would teach to class is the 4 types of delivery. And this includes manuscript speaking, memorized speaking, improv speaking, and extemporaneous speaking. And then the first one of those that we're going to be talking about is manuscript speaking. And manuscript speaking is basically when you write your entire speech down and you recite it to your audience from a piece of paper due to fear of forgetting. This tends to make your speech less interesting, and teachers do not really recommend this. A case where this could be used effectively is serious matters. An example is the President of the United States uses this technique. And then if you were to use this way of speaking, just because if you can't remember it or anything like that, I'm going to share a few tips that you could do this in the best, most effective way possible. First of all, when you're writing down your thing, you should make it known in your writing where you're taking breaks and pauses, and also you could use symbols to your advantage to help you easily read it and to mark areas so you don't get confused. Highlighting is also an important part during writing it down. You could also try to increase eye contact by not spending the whole time looking at the manuscript. For example, just write down phrases and try your best not to write your entire speech down word for word so that you can maintain at least a little bit of eye contact. Even though you are just reading it, it is also important to still practice it and keep practicing it up. You can also still practice eye contact and when you are going to be taking your breaks and your pauses. And also for practicing, it's important to practice reading it at a normal pace and to not try to just speed over the text too fast, because it can be easy just from reading something to just go through it super fast and not take your breaks and your pauses. It's also important to still try to incorporate natural hand movements and some of the other speech tactics that we're going to be learning about to help enhance the quality of your speech. The second type of delivery we have is memorized speaking. And this is basically having your speech completely memorized and just delivering it word from word from what you have memorized. An advantage to this is being able to keep up and do great eye contact and hand gestures. However, memorized speaking can sound like manuscript speaking, just because your speech could sound too rehearsed. So because of that, teachers also do not recommend doing this tactic, and there's others that could benefit you better. The third one that I have on my slide is improv speaking. Improv speaking is coming up with comments and remarks on the spot. A con is that these speeches usually lack research and accountability just because they're usually not prepared as well and you don't have anything to look at. Good improv speeches usually take 3 weeks to prepare, and it is important to still practice if you have an improv speech for some reason. First step is you can mentally prepare for who the audience is, along with what the topic of the speech is and what the audience is going to expect you to say. It's also important to keep it short and to the point. Most improv speeches are only 1 to 3 minutes long. You should also still try to organize and have an introduction, body paragraph, and conclusion in your improv speech. An example in the book that I liked that explained how to help keep organization in improv speaking is first thing you should talk about is the past. Second thing you should talk about is the now or the present. And then lastly, you should conclude with talking about the future. You usually speak from personal thoughts and experiences since you don't have time to research beforehand. So it's important to pick the most important one that will keep the audience interested. And it's also important to be respectful of who the audience will be in the topics if they are controversial. A quote from the book that I thought kind of explained why is honest but not committed answer. You don't want to say anything that could look wrong on you just because you spoke in the moment and didn't have time to prepare for the question that would be asked. And then moving on to the last speaking technique I have is extemporaneous speaking. And this is basically having your speech outline memorized, but you're not just speaking word for word off of a piece of paper. You still have part of it memorized on your own and still coming up with things on your own as well. And this is the most recommended technique and usually the most successful way to get your speech across. Teachers usually want you to know how to do this and practice doing this in classes. The first time you should research your speech a ton and you should use a lot of notes. And then after that, you should slowly start rehearsing with less and less notes. You should also try to switch up the phrases and words that you're rehearsing with just so it doesn't sound memorized and so you are getting different ideas out there. The last time you rehearse an extemporaneous speech, you should look over your speech and make sure you only have notes for things that you need the most. My next slide is on effective delivery, and this includes a bunch of things. Some things are eye contact, gestures, movements, posture, and facial expressions. Effective delivery basically includes everything else that you need to know about how to properly deliver a speech. Starting with our first one, we're going to go with eye contact. And eye contact is the most important thing because it opens communication with your audience and it also helps them feel more interested because it feels like you're talking directly to them and not just reading or doing what you're supposed to for a class. Eye contact also makes what you're saying sound more believable and again helps keep people interested. And eye contact also gives you the sense of trust. The amount of eye contact appropriate also kind of depends on culture of the audience, along with a lot of other things that we're talking about. Some tips for eye contact is that your opening sentence and your closing sentence should be memorized so that you can make eye contact with the crowd. This helps, again, gain interest and just make the connections that you're speaking to them and you want them to listen. Also, while using eye contact, it's important to rotate who you're making eye contact with. Don't just stare at one person in the room. Make everyone feel like you are personally making eye contact with each individual to make them feel like they're all directly being talked to. Next thing we have is gestures. And gestures is using your hands and your body to help you communicate and to assist you in your communication. Using hand and body gestures could also make you look more comfortable. And along with eye contact, the amount of gestures appropriate could also vary from culture to culture. Your gestures should look natural and flow with your speech. They should also help you look, what you're saying sound more bold and also help you look more confident. Your gestures should not be rehearsed with your speech because it might take away from their natural effect. It might make them look rehearsed and not natural like they're supposed to. Gestures should be consistent with the message that you're saying. They should not be overdone or taking attention away from the main message that you are trying to get across from your audience. They should not counteract that in any way. They should be an aid and help you and not work against you. Next up, we have movements. And movements is basically trying to figure out if the best option to say your speech is standing in place or to move and walk around or to sit down. This could also deal with the type of the speech, if you're doing it in a class, if you're doing it for work, and what is more appropriate in that aspect. If you are using movement, in which most speeches you should be, it's important to move with a purpose while reciting your speech, but to also make sure that it does not distract from your message. It is better to stand still rather than distract your listeners with random movements. Movement should also, along with gestures, flow with your speech and really help pull it together. Movements also help establish immediacy, and some examples of immediacy behaviors include eye contact, appropriate gestures, along with maintaining an appropriate distance between you and the listeners. Your movements should make sense to the audience, along with your gestures and eye contact. And relaxed posture and smiling are also included in this list. Smiling can help you and your listeners feel more at ease along with having a relaxed posture. It makes you seem more open to your audience and more considerate, and it also might make them seem more interested. Next up on the list here is posture. And the book states that posture communicates your intensity of emotions. Slouching will make your voice not sound as serious, and good posture helps your audience take into consideration the things that you were saying. A few tips to good posture is standing straight while pulling your shoulders back, and stand tall while keeping your eye contact with the room. And then at any point, if you feel like your posture is slouching or anything, you just take a moment and do those steps again and then get back on track. And it might also help retain your listeners' interest if they see that you're also fixing yourself. Last on the list on this slide, we have facial expression. Facial expression also helps reveal the emotions of your speech along with your attitude towards the topic. The audience can see your facial expressions before they hear your statements or your speech. Your facial expressions should look natural and flow with the message that you're trying to get across. Humans can actually pronounce thousands of facial expressions, but usually only show the main 6, which is happy, sad, angry, anything like that is basically in that list. And then we have a few tips for facial expressions and how to just make sure that they interact with what you're saying in the correct way. When you're practicing your speech, you can also practice your facial expressions along with your movements. You can look at yourself and practice in the mirror to see what your immediate natural facial expressions will be and how you need to tweak them if they don't convey with like the message you're trying to get across. Facial expressions should go with the mood of your speech. It shouldn't be a surprise, and your face should match up with what you're saying. You don't want to give the wrong idea with your facial expressions, or you don't want to confuse your audience if your face is showing something opposite than you're trying to say. Facial expressions could also depend on culture in the way of what is appropriate, just like a lot of the other things we talked about. Next up, we have vocal delivery. And then this is also the next thing that I included on my slide, and it's volume, articulation, dialect, and pronunciation. Vocal delivery is the way our voice comes across, and it can give a certain impression of us just off the bat. The way you deliver your voice can say a lot about you as a person or the message that you're saying. There are 2 goals with vocal delivery, and these 2 goals are speak to be understood and speak with vocal variety to maintain interest. Starting off with speak to be understood. This comes with 4 aspects, which are the ones that we're talking about: volume, articulation, dialect, and pronunciation. Starting off with volume, which is how soft or how loud you speak. The more air you give out allows your volume to get louder and clearer. And obviously you want to maintain a good volume to where everyone can hear you, but it doesn't sound like you're yelling at them or screaming at them. The next thing we have is articulation. And this is the production of clear and distinct speech sounds. If you do not produce articulation, then your listeners might not understand everything you're saying, and it might leave room for miscommunication. An issue along with miscommunication is slurring your words together, and that could make your audience not understand what you're saying or take something wrongly. So it's just important to try to do that to the best of your ability. And next we have dialect, and that is the next step of vocal delivery. I found a direct quote from the book, which I thought helped explain it good. A consistent style of pronouncing words common to an ethnic group or a geographical region. And then there's also 4 elements in doing this, which the first one we're going to talk about is using proper enunciation. Enunciation can also change per culture, which can make it tricky. If you have a speaker, you're speaking to someone who doesn't speak in the same way that you do, it could also cause some misunderstanding. The second thing on this list is to pronounce vowels clearly, and a tip for doing this could be stretching vowels within words. Could be helpful just to help understand what you're saying and just make sure the word is saying more clearly. The third one is pronounce consonants appropriately. And the sounds of K, F, H, Z, T, G, and B could also vary in language, just like I was saying earlier. So it sometimes could be tricky to pronounce them clearly if you talk a different way than your audience or something like that. Consonants should be soft and slow within your words in a way that is easy to understand. The fourth thing is using appropriate speaking rate. Talking too fast could also cause misunderstanding and could also cause word slurrings. And then going back to pronunciation is just when sounds forming words are clear and accurate, and just making sure that you can understand it. Going back, we're going to speaking with variety. It's important to have a good pitch, which is how low or how high your voice sounds. You don't want to sound quiet, and you want to be able to be heard and understood. You also want to have a good speaking rate. You don't want to talk so fast that your listeners cannot even take in what you're saying. A common mistake for public speaking is talking too fast due to nerves, and I know that I myself struggle with this. It's important to use pauses at appropriate times so that your listeners have a second to retain information and to process the important things that you were saying. Next up is my conclusion, and this is the 2 main things I wrote down are practice your speech beforehand and be well rested and organized. So for the few days before your speech, it's very important to practice your speech. If you are performing for a crowd, practice makes perfect. If you need to reach a certain time limit, it's also beneficial to time yourself while you are practicing to try to get as close as possible, or if you are talking too fast, you might need to add a few things. It's also beneficial to practice using all the skills that we went over in this chapter. Examples are eye contact, gestures. You could also practice using your aids if you have PowerPoint or any a video you're showing the class, just to make sure it opens correctly. It's also important to be prepared to deliver for any public speaking experience, and important to not wing your research. Your research needs to be prepared, and your speech needs to be practiced to make sure you sound educated and well spoken. It's also helpful to know ahead of time your audience and what they will be expecting. Along with this, you should make sure your topic is interesting and on point. It should make sense, and also that it matches up with the rubric for the class. And then along with well rested, that's very important so that you can give your best effort. And yeah, so basically going over everything we did in the chapter, This all helps you speak confidently and all helps you get your point across. And then concluding the chapter, I sent the class some discussion questions to fill out along with my speech. Thank you.